Every family is different. Most families have excess because they don't die with zero money in the bank. They have some, and they leave something to their children. And some of the children don't need the money because they have their own career and their own ability to gather and save resources. So if there's a conversation that could be useful, go over it in case any unfairness appears, whether one child expects more or says that the other child doesn't deserve any, or there's other problems in the family. Just work it out. And I think putting things out in the open can be really useful.
Welcome to the Inheritance of Hope podcast. Every day, 562 children lose a parent to terminal illness. They shouldn't have to face that alone. You can pretend to avoid the painful realities of illness, grief, and death, or you can deal with the real stuff in caring community. On the podcast, people in Inheritance of Hope's community share raw, personal stories of pain, trials, and the shadow of death, which are also stories of joy in terminal illness. Find more Inheritance of Hope community at inheritanceofhope.org.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Inheritance of Hope podcast. My name is Ellie, and today we will be unpacking another facet of what legacy means. And I think when people hear legacy, they often think of financial legacy. We've covered a few other topics of what legacy could mean, but today we are going to be focusing on that financial piece. So we have a guest with us to walk us through what this could look like. So go ahead and introduce yourself and give the audience a little bit about your background.
Thanks, Ellie. My name is Dan Kramer. I'm married to my wife, Margaret, for 28 years. I have 3 sons and a daughter-in-law. I was born in the Midwest in St. Louis, and I was born a second time at age 27 when I took Christ as my Savior. I lived in New York City for 25 years, where we raised our sons intentionally, and we now live in Franklin, Tennessee since 2021. I started my career as a CPA until about 1996 when a fire destroyed my apartment in New York City. And when I had to find my own home, I also found a new career as a financial advisor. My 2 oldest sons now work for me. I call it a dream that I never had come true. I spend 8 hours, 10 hours a day with them. It's a dream for me. I love it. Our goal is to help our clients manage their own money, so money doesn't manage them. So that's kind of our motto. That's what we do, and that's who I am.
We're so glad to have you on, and I love that nod to the intergenerational aspect of legacy and financial legacy. So the fact that you get to work with your sons day to day is incredible. I love that piece of your story. I am curious, when you hear the phrase financial legacy, what does it mean to you personally?
I think financial legacy begins with the idea that nothing that we have is ours. We didn't bring it in and we're not taking it with us. And that's the first step of being a steward or a financial steward of our life. Second is as a parent is to train our children about biblical stewardship. I include giving, spending, and saving any of the money that they hold. They've learned from the very beginning to be generous, and they do it in different times, different perspectives, and we all learn. It's hard. It's not easy for everybody. And then thirdly, I try to provide my family clarity about what we have and how we want to handle it. And then at my death, I don't want them to be confused or burdened by things that were hidden or things that are not accessible or what things are worth, but continue on that path of stewardship. One of the pieces of financial legacy is that we don't store up treasures on earth. We want to store up treasures in heaven. That seems abstract, but everything we own, we don't want to idolize it and let it destroy us if we lose it. Randy Alcorn says in a number of his books, he says, we can't take it with us, but we can send it on ahead of us. So we try to incorporate that as we think about stewardship.
That piece of just equipping and setting the people you love up for success is so core to legacy. And especially finances can be really tricky, especially if people are in the midst of loss and grief. So I love what you said of just no surprises. There's accessibility and visibility when it comes to finances so that there's no guesswork, especially a lot of our Inheritance of Hope families are in a season of anticipatory grief, and there's a lot to handle in that. But thinking through your financial legacy as you are anticipating a change of season and maybe the loss of a loved one, this is so important. How do we start thinking about money in terms of impact and legacy instead of security and success?
We can't take it with us, but we can send it on ahead of us. Each of us has to translate what God means in storing up treasures on earth versus storing up treasures in heaven. It's really important because everybody has an emotional reaction to money, whether they think too much about it or place too much emphasis or importance in it, or they ignore it and say, I don't need to worry about that. I'll just live my life. I think money is to be handled. We need to manage it, otherwise it will manage us in some way, in some negative way. That's the first thing I think about.
Yeah. How can families begin having conversations about values and finances before the time of crisis or transition happens?
That's a good question. I think being open to our family, my spouse, my children about money, I think we need to minimize our reaction or our emotional worry about money. God says we don't have to worry about our life. The lilies of the field and the birds of the air that God takes care of, He'll take care of us. At the same time, we can't ignore it. We do it a little at a time. When I think about my children when they were younger, my oldest son saw a catastrophe. I think it was a tsunami in Asia, and he was heartbroken. And he went downstairs to get to his bedroom, and he grabbed his savings bank and he brought it up and said, Dad, I want to give this to the people in Sri Lanka. And I said, well, how much do you want to give? And he said, all of it. I don't need it. And I thought that was a beautiful picture of his stewardship. He knew he was going to be taken care of. And he says, give it all to them. And I think we should all have an approach similar to that if we can. But, we're burdened a little bit by money.
If you don't look at it at all, and then you're put in a position where you now have to figure out all these details that you never once looked at before, that's a shock to the nervous system. I think of my parents last year brought my sister and I into the room and said, here is the list of all of our accounts. Here's where everything you might need if we both die. Here's where all the things are. And to my sister and I, that was not a shocking conversation because for years, my parents have talked about the stewardship of money and it wasn't unfamiliar. And so when you have a big conversation like that, it might not even have to feel that big if you just take the baby steps, like you're saying, of talk about it, and especially with children growing up, so that when you see something shocking and you want to help, your child is already reaching for the piggy bank, and that's already placed on their heart.
In Proverbs, it says that a man's riches may ransom his life, meaning we are beholden, we are slaves, we are held captive sometimes by our riches. And then it says, but a poor man hears no threat. So the more money a family acquires or more money that a child has, it becomes more of a burden, not less of a burden. And I think people think of it the other way. If I just had a little bit more money. And so the earlier you can teach your children that and teach yourself that, the better your life will go, I believe.
How would you encourage the people listening to think about what their money can say after they're gone and that legacy that they could leave? How can they start? Because it might feel very intimidating. What are the first steps that you would encourage?
Well, every family is a little different. So if the relationship is good between parents and children, I think having a conversation over the years, not just at one time, about their values and how they want to invest their treasure in heaven. What does it look like for that family? Every family is different, but some families have excess. Most families have excess because they don't die with zero money in the bank. They have some, and they leave something to their children. And some of the children don't need the money because they have their own career and their own ability to gather and save resources. So if there's a conversation that could be useful, go over it in case any unfairness appears, whether one child expects more or says that the other child doesn't deserve any, or there's other problems in the family. Just work it out. And I think putting things out in the open can be really useful.
The best time to have this conversation to me feels like when you're not in crisis mode, when you're not in the moment where you have to decide and you're also dealing with the complexities of grief. Like you're saying, start early and build it up over the years. Yeah. And you have a concept that you like to talk about financial legacy through a love letter concept. Is that right?
Well, I didn't coin that phrase. I've seen different planning strategies that are called something like a love letter. And what that would be is not a legal document. So the legal documents in the estate planning universe are the will, power of attorney, other documents, living will, healthcare proxy, and things. But this is not a formal document. It can be anything. But what it can do is reinforce how the family defines treasure and how it will be distributed and why, and just trying to answer the questions that they would anticipate at an early death or a reasonable time to die, so that the family is reminded of what they talked about, what they agreed upon. And it can include things like, call this person. This is the person who handles our financial matters. Or call the accountant. This is the accountant's name and number. This is the attorney's name and number. These are the things that you don't see in the mail, but you should expect a bill coming for this. I mean, there's all kinds of things you can put in there to relieve some of that burden, that confusion. While at a death of a parent, there's mourning to be done. There's grieving, there's sadness, there's all kinds of emotions. Let's take some of that burden of financial confusion out. And that's what I recommend. It can be customized for every family.
I like that language because it really does feel like such a loving thing that you can do for your family. Like my sister and I felt so loved when my parents had taken the time to not only do all of that work, but then share it with us. It did feel like a love letter in a sort of way.
When we take our wedding vows, it's often the words are something like, we promise to take our spouse, to have and to hold, in richer or poor, in sickness and in health, to love, honor, and cherish as long as we both shall live. And I think we should extend that to about another 9 months, so you can, even after death, you're still loving your family by doing something like this.
What are some small decisions that families can make now that create those long-term ripple effects, especially when it comes to financial decisions?
One thing is to never hide anything from your spouse. And if you are the main caretaker of financial matters, provide full access to your spouse and maybe also your children so that they can access it, whether it's passwords or logins, but just that things don't surprise them.
Doesn't seem maybe worth the effort now, but if you're in a situation where you need that and you don't have it, man, the 10 minutes it took you to set it up will feel so consequential.
Yeah, I could even put it on the reverse. Like, the children might want to provide that to their parents too. We don't know when God's calling us home. We can minimize some of that extra burden throughout the pain of losing somebody prematurely. Be an open book to some degree. You have to use discretion. All of that, I think, can be really useful.
Right, especially for families who are in the Inheritance of Hope family, because that situation is a premature death. Sometimes the child will die before the parent, and now there's this young family system who doesn't have a mom or dad or the spouse anymore. So these conversations feel especially relevant to have now to prepare you and your whole family for success. And from your experience being in this realm for a long time, what conversations do families often avoid that they actually need to have around some of the things you named, like inheritance, charitable giving, legacy planning?
I think if there is a prodigal child, or if there is an adult child that perhaps has more financial resources or ability to earn money, or they live in luxury, and then you have a missionary child. Those kind of things can be perceived as unfair, perhaps. And some families want equal balance between siblings or children. So I think just discussing all that and having people, the children understand and have the the parents understand what they're leaving to their children in case any of that is misunderstood or harmful. If it's not understood, sometimes it can be fair, but still painful. Those are good open discussions to have.
And I mentioned charitable giving. So I would love to hear from your perspective, both in that financial realm, but also as a believer, what part does charitable giving play in legacy building?
Charitable giving, I mean, any kind of giving, whether it's time or money or resources, is a gift to the giver. Bible talks about it as more blessed to give than it is to receive. And it's true. And I think everybody can recognize it. So many people don't take advantage of that gift that God's given us. So try to teach that. When our kids were younger, we lived in New York City and we worked with the homeless. We knew them by name. We had many opportunities to give of time and money, and they took advantage of it. It was a normal part of their life. It's not something that's a burden that God placed on us. So that's one a bit practical aspect. I've read some books that have challenged the way people give charitably. There is a lot of belief that we follow Scripture by giving 10% of our income or our wealth. Some go as high as 23 or 33%. If you go to the Old Testament, we can find some evidence of that. I challenge that and want to start by seeing that everything we have is God's. Everything that we received came from God. It was a gift of His, and it's our responsibility to use it. So one of the things I do with clients is I ask them about their own stewardship. Do they look at their money as, or their charitable giving, do they decide on an amount or percentage that they'll give, and do they live on the rest? Or is it the reverse? Do they discern through prayer and consideration how they should live their life and then give away the rest? It's the reverse. And I don't tell them which one I think is right, because I think we are stewards, and so we can discern that ourselves. But maybe there's something in between there. And so I like looking at life that way. Everything we have is giving to God, even rent or a house. That's God's money. Are we spending it wisely? So that's been my approach.
Where even giving or spending or saving can all be worship. The posture really matters. And I love what you said about when you are the one giving, it feels so often like we are the ones receiving because of how much of a gift it is. And I can speak from that with Inheritance of Hope. It is all donor funded. And so much is done by volunteers who are volunteering and giving because of how life-giving it is. And it feels so worshipful, and it feels like it's filling their bucket, even though, their bank account might be taking a hit or their weekends are less free. Their life just feels so much fuller because of the giving.
Yeah, that's great.
And when we think about charitable giving, I think a lot of times you think, okay, I can give a one-time gift, I can give monthly. That's kind of what we think about giving. But from your background, I'm sure you know a lot of more creative or intentional ways that people can incorporate giving into like their long-term financial planning. Do you have any suggestions or ideas that people could look into?
Some people have more excess than others. They know that they're gonna die with more money than they needed and more money than their children need. And they have to discern for themselves, do they leave anything to their children or how much? So I have given books to clients on ideas on stewardship, and I know one that had a lot of wealth, and he knew that if he and his wife left their 4 children everything, it would be destructive to their children. And they chose a very modest amount that each of the children would receive, and the rest would go to charity of their choice, of the parents' choice. And so they laid that out because they wanted to protect their children from excess wealth. And that may change. They can always adjust some of those things, unless it's going into an irrevocable trust. You can prepare in ways like that. I think that's just one example.
Is it also an option to give via stocks and bonds and some of those ways?
Yeah, if all depends on the family and how they invest their money. But if their money is invested in non-retirement accounts and they have appreciated securities, they can donate the appreciated securities directly to most all charities or into a donor advised fund. It's a version of a charitable foundation. or a charitable fund that you create, and then you grant money to charities over time, over your lifetime. So that's one way to minimize the tax on selling investments. Of course, you can do that with real estate as well. There's a lot of other methods. Yeah, that's just one example. There's plenty of others depending on the size of wealth and what it would warrant. There's a lot of complex trust situations depending on the family, depending on the needs of the children, and what charities that they target to bless. So,
I feel like for the general population, hearing some of those terms and things
yeah,
like that feel very overwhelming, or, I don't know
right,
what that all entails.
right.
What resources or tools would you be able to share for our audience as far as estate planning, financial planning, books even? I know you've mentioned quite a few, and we can link anything in the show notes, but what comes to mind for tools?
Well, the internet provides a lot of answers to our searches. I do believe a personal financial advisor, a planner, um, that's not trying to sell you anything, but just provide advice, can guide you towards solutions that fit you. Obviously, the tools don't fit everybody. So whether it's charitable giving or tax minimization or saving appropriately for inheritances or family needs down the line, those are all things that are specific to a person or a family. So I address it head on with every single client. Some of it has to do with their goals, their income, their net worth, their burdens that are down the line, the family that they're caring for, maybe their parents, maybe they have handicapped children, maybe they have other medical needs that they need to prepare for. So it's very specific to each of our clients. And there are a lot of complex financial terms and strategies. Some are necessary or helpful, and some are not. Some are just a way to sell an insurance product, which isn't always useful, but it should be customized to you. So I would find a financial professional you trust that's just providing you advice for your stewardship needs, and you take it from there. But that's the approach I would take.
It's so individualized, and
Yeah.
listening to this podcast episode is a great first step to get into that frame of mind so that you can move deeper into this conversation. But there's no way that we could cover all of the nuances
Right.
in this episode, like, because you should meet with someone to address your personal situation. So I'm glad that we are starting this conversation and encouraging people to go deeper. Before we leave, what encouragements would you give to listeners who are genuinely wanting to live in a very intentional, generous, and legacy-focused way?
Well, I wrote a list of what I called habits of highly satisfied investors, and I'll just read a couple of them that I think are useful for this conversation. The first is that we should have a biblical perspective or proper perspective on money and treasure. So keep our eyes on that, not assuming that more money solves all our problems or
Mm.
more money, happier life. There's not a real correlation there. And then I would say another one is to know what you own, you and your spouse or you and your children. Know all the assets that you have and know how much you owe, like any debt. So you're just aware. Don't let it consume you. Just know it. Obviously, another one is to give away your money. And I think it's useful for people to have a guide or a plan to help you achieve financial goals that you might have, whether it's college savings or whether it's buying a house or whether it's retirement or it's a giving goal. Work on a plan to establish that. So you're working towards those goals that will at least satisfy in some respect. You're building up treasures in heaven. There are three other things I would say. There is a rapper. I don't normally quote rappers, but Notorious B.I.G. said, "Mo money, mo problems." And what he was saying is just having more money. Having more money is not going to solve your problems. It's going to bring you more problems. And so that's what a lot of people find themselves in a cycle of just trying to gather and save more money, earn more money on investments, and that will solve all my problems. And I would say that money is not our problem, and it's also not our solution. Yeah. So I think how I would summarize trying to solve problems with money. And we can minimize some of those problems with respect to this love letter. I think that can open our eyes, and it's loving to our family, but don't let it consume your life.
It sounds like the pattern through this whole conversation is the posture of the heart. in stewardship of a resource, not trying to own this resource or be owned by it, but just stewarding it with an open hand. And that in and of itself is just going to build a legacy. Whether you leave $0 behind or $1,000,000 behind or more, being known as someone who is generous and loving and kind is the greatest legacy that you
Yeah.
could leave.
Yeah. No, I appreciate how you said that.
Well, Dan, thank you so much for your time and wisdom. You can tell it's something that you know a lot about and lead others well through. So we appreciate getting to hear this, and I hope people are really encouraged to take a deeper look.
Thanks, Ellie. I appreciate your time.